Hi, and welcome to another edition of Newsmakers Journal of the Vaccine Year. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, May 14th, and I'm very pleased to welcome back Tyler Hayden, news editor for the Santa Barbara Independent. Tyler, thanks for taking the time. I know you got a lot of stuff on your plate.
Always time for Jerry.
Well, we were talking just a minute ago. One of my big bugaboos in our under-resourced news desert that we're in is we just don't have time to do a lot of follow-up on stuff. And last year, just about a year ago, in the wake of the George Floyd killing, you started doing reporting on local use of force by law enforcement and some of the cases that we really hadn't seen to take a look at that, and you really stayed on it. And you've done a series that's focused on the sheriff's office that I want to talk about today, and found, among other things, that the county has paid out $9 million in 5 cases, misconduct cases, since 2010. What has it been like trying to suss out the information from the sheriff's department and the county?
Really, I got to give credit to our state transparency laws, because otherwise I don't think we would know much about these cases. Almost all of the information in the articles you're talking about have come from me filing what are called Public Records Act requests, and the county abiding by them, eventually filling them. So when I originally started this project, I would ask for full case files, every bit of record on these incidents, including video, including internal reports, statements from the victims' families, anything I could get my hands on. So that's really the tool by which I've gotten all this info. I mean, the sheriff has been somewhat communicative in talking about these cases in sort of a general sense, discussing how the vast majority of interactions between civilians and the sheriff's department are positive and professional, and no one gets hurt, and except for these sort of extreme one-off cases. And he's not wrong about that. 99.8% of interactions are positive. But what I thought was important, and what the paper thought was important, was to try to dissect these one-offs, really, and understand what happened. And then the bigger question is what was done afterward. Was any discipline handed down to any of the deputies if they were in the wrong at any of their conduct? And what's been interesting to find out is that even though these deputies, as far as we can tell, have not been disciplined, but Brown and the sheriff's office, Sheriff Brown and the sheriff's office, are very careful to not disclose, personnel.
Well, that's something you can't find out from
Correct.
the Public Records Act, because the cops and the law enforcement is protected by the law.
Yep. So that's the flip side of that transparency coin, is they don't have to tell you anything about disciplinary action or trainings or retraining. So we don't know what happened to these deputies after these incidents. But what we do know from these records requests is that, even though they weren't charged with any criminal counts, whether it was manslaughter or murder or aggravated battery, any kind of criminal statute, they were in some of these cases sued in civil court. And that's where these large payouts that you mentioned took place. So it's just there's a disconnect there, where something takes place, something terrible and violent. Someone is either hurt terribly, like with a broken back or a broken neck, or they're shot and killed. And we hear, on one hand, from the sheriff's office and from the district attorney's office, law enforcement did everything right. They followed the rules. They were by the book. This was just a horrible circumstance. But then on the other side, you have the county paying out millions of dollars to the families without admitting any wrongdoing. I mean, that's part of the language of these settlements.
Yeah, Brown always calls it a business decision.
A business decision, yeah. So and maybe, and I don't think he's wrong about that either, but in that business decision, the county is weighing uh, the pros and cons of delivering a huge payout, millions of dollars of taxpayer money, or on the other side, risking going to trial, potentially paying out more. And I think even more significantly, if these cases go to trial, if the county fought these cases and didn't settle and took them to trial, we would find out much more about these incidents, and we would find about much more about the disciplinary action potentially against the deputies who were involved. And so I think in a lot of cases, the business decision is to keep that stuff quiet, to keep it under wraps. And I guess that's smart from the county's perspective, but it doesn't help us as the public understand any better what
Well,
happened or who was involved and
yeah,
so
and
on.
I take your point that, yeah, the vast majority of cases, nothing happens, but it's just a fact that sworn officers have the right of state sanctioned life and death, as well as state sanctioned violence. And so,
Yep.
even though it's a small number of cases, I think it's hugely important. Here's something I don't know that I should know. In the wake of the George Floyd killing, there was a lot of commentary and protests and meetings and so on. And the city of Santa Barbara took up this demand by Black Lives Matter to create some sort of civilian review process. And that's
Right.
going forward in a kind of slow bureaucratic way, so that at the end of the day, presumably there will be some transparency about whether or not there was accountability for cases like this. Has the
Right.
county done that or not?
No, no, it's been kind of a non-starter at the county level. And I'll say, I mean, and this is not a criticism of Healing Justice and Black Lives Matter. I really commend them for getting the ball rolling with the police department, with these, you know, basically demands for transparency and accountability. And I'm happy that's happening at the city level. I think a version of that with the county and the sheriff's office is just as, if not more, needed. And there's just not a lot of momentum and energy there yet. Maybe there's stuff going on behind the scenes that I don't know about. Maybe there's a group working on this, but from what I can tell, the county has not received the same amount of sort of focus and energy from Healing Justice, BLM, or anybody else for that matter. There are comments here and there, during the public comment period, but not that sort of cohesive push for more transparency from the
Well,
sheriff.
and the elected officials haven't taken it up either. I mean,
Yeah,
the supervisors all want to, grandstand and talk about, they're anti-racist and equity, blah, blah, but
yeah.
they have not taken up this because Bill Brown is an elected official,
I was just
just
gonna
like
say, yeah. Yep. He's an elected official, unlike the police chief who's appointed by our city administrator, in the city of Santa Barbara. So there are significant limits on what the county supervisors can do. Though, like you said, I mean, there could be more. There could be sort of front-facing dialogue about how this could happen, what they want to see happen. Kind of get the people who ultimately would have to take this on fired up about it. But yeah, so far there just hasn't been the appetite for that.
Well, let's be specific about the kind of thing we're talking about. There's a deputy named Jeremy Rogers who you have written about. And as you say, it's unclear whether trouble looks for him or he looks for trouble, but he's been at the center of three or five various cases.
So 3 incidents that have resulted in 5 fatalities. No, I'm sorry, 4 now. Yes, 4 incidents and 5 fatalities.
And just briefly review what
Sure. So there was an incident about a decade ago where he and a few deputies responded to a man who was supposedly suicidal. This man was on a walker and severely disabled. He had had a brain tumor and was very distraught about it. His wife had called 911 asking for help. And three deputies showed up, and instead of help being delivered, they shot and killed this guy. They say the guy had a gun and pointed it at them. I don't think there's any dispute that this gentleman did have a gun, but it's a lot of he said, she said about how the gun was held and where it was held. And Deputy Rogers, one of the deputies who shot this guy, and then when he was lying on the ground, Rogers, according to a lawsuit filed by the family, jumped up on the stoop where this gentleman was standing and had fallen and shot him in the face at point blank range and killed him.
Was there a lawsuit about that?
There was a lawsuit filed by the man's widow, and she eventually settled out of court. So it was another one of these cases where the sheriff's office in the county made a business decision to pay this woman and keep her quiet, and that was that. So all we have to base the narrative on is what the sheriff said happened and their official report, and then but what the wife said happened, and it's very different, very different.
And there were no body cameras at that point.
No body cameras. There were audio recording equipment. There was audio recording equipment available then. I don't think any of them were switched on though on the deputies. So yeah, there's no like hard evidence of how, this incident took place. But it's tragic. And this guy was shot and killed when his wife was just trying to get him help.
Very often in these cases, I mean, let's be blunt, some of the people who end up getting hurt or killed, are not leading citizens. I mean, they're
Right.
trying to avoid arrest, or they're doing. This guy was at home. I mean, anyway, what else was Rogers?
Yeah, he was at home. I mean, I do want to though stress the fact that he was carrying a gun. I think we can say that as a fact.
Which was the reason that his wife.
Right, exactly. But we don't know if or how he pointed the gun at the deputies, if he was truly a threat. The main point of the lawsuit was that these guys showed up and they really just kind of stormed the place, went straight to the backyard, didn't talk to the wife, didn't try to sort of start a dialogue with the guy, that they came in with, sounds like literally guns blazing, and killed him. So that was the first incident. The second one, there was a wrong way driver incident on Highway 101. A guy who, as you said, definitely not an upstanding citizen, was high and drunk at the time, was driving the wrong way down the 101. Rogers heard about it. It's funny. This is one of these details that I don't know why the sheriff's office cares so much about, but they say that there wasn't a pursuit. That Rogers was just responding, though I don't know what he was doing if he wasn't pursuing. Like, he wasn't just watching this guy.
He drove onto the freeway.
Yeah, he drove onto the freeway.
Right, as the protocol is, it's supposed to be the CHP, correct?
Correct. So what, and this is another lawsuit that was filed, this time by a different family, a different set of victims, that he violated protocol. He jumped on the highway, and he caused a wrong way collision. Not the suspect drove past him, but to the cars, it's sort of hard it's difficult to explain. But basically, Rogers caused a collision that didn't involve the suspect, but involved I'm sorry, Jerry. It did involve the suspect. I'm just trying to get it straight.
No, yeah, right. The other people who were just, on the freeway driving properly had to swerve out of the way to get away from him, correct?
Thank you, exactly. And the result was 2 people were killed and 2 people were seriously and permanently injured. And in that case, the county settled for, you might have in front of you, 4.5 million. Yeah. And that again, we heard that from the sheriff's office, that Deputy Rogers did nothing wrong, that he was following their playbook, and that he should be commended for his actions. And then we find out a few months later, or after the fact, or when we file these PRA requests, like, oh, actually, there's a lot more to this story. He was seemingly at fault for this accident that claimed 2 lives, a young man and an older woman who were related, and the young man's sisters who were in the back seat who were maimed. I mean, who were still suffering debilitating injuries. So that was the second incident. The third, Rogers was responding to a robbery call up in North County, and the suspect had led deputies on a high-speed chase, and Rogers caught up with him on a bridge up in the valley, and the guy got in his car, and Rogers had stopped in the middle of the road and gotten out and drawn his gun, and the guy started to drive towards him, and rather than try to jump out of the way or jump back in his car or take some kind of evasive action, Rogers opened fire and unloaded on the guy through his windshield and shot him and killed him.
And
And
again,
there's
this was against policy, right? I mean, the way he stopped, the way he didn't call for back, there's a
like,
lot. And it,
yeah,
yeah, we can sit here and say you should do this, should have done that. But these things are in the training that were violated. And we have
right.
no way of knowing if there was any accountability whatsoever.
Correct. No, you make a good point, and I glossed over that. Yeah, that he jumped the gun, so to speak, and kind of ran towards the danger. When, according to experts who have looked at this case, the family members of the victim in this case, and attorneys, he could have done something else to either stop this guy or slow him down, instead of shoot him and kill him. So that was the first. Go ahead.
Go ahead, finish.
I was going to go on to the next incident, and that was a couple years ago, where Jeremy Rogers was with a few other deputies and responded to the home of Ron Ely, the Tarzan actor, because Ron Ely's son, Cameron Ely, had stabbed to death his mother, Ron's wife, in a horrible, violent attack. Perhaps drug fueled, we don't quite know. But when the deputies responded, they found the Ron Ely's wife very close to death, and they encountered Cameron Ely, the son, the suspect, out in the family's driveway. They didn't see him at first, but then he sort of approached them. And there's audio recording of this. There's not video, but there's audio recording from multiple deputies' microphones on their uniforms, and you hear Cameron Ely walk up. He never says anything in any of the tapes, but you hear the deputies kind of gently telling him to raise his hands and to stay calm, and it seems like a very sort of controlled moment, and then all of a sudden gunfire rings out, and Ely shot a couple dozen times and killed. And the way the sheriffs describe it is that he had at some point lunged for a gun and yelled and taken some aggressive action that scared the deputies so bad that they all opened fire. But none of that is on the audio recording. And the law enforcement's excuse for that is that 2 or 3 seconds was for some reason not captured, yet the audio right before it and right after is clear as a bell on multiple microphones. But this one critical moment is just sort of lost to faulty technology, supposedly. And there's yet another lawsuit. This one is pending. There hasn't been any payouts yet. But the family is, they're livid with what they think was the murder of Cameron. I mean, it doesn't matter that he had, in the eyes of the law, it doesn't matter that he had just probably murdered someone, that he just killed someone. Deputies aren't supposed to execute someone on the spot. And I'm not saying they did that intentionally, but that's what happened. And there was, zero due process for this guy, for this suspect. So it's striking. And again, I sound like a broken record, but we hear from the sheriff's office and we hear from the district attorney's office that the deputies acted totally properly, nothing to see here. And yet, the discovery that comes from a lawsuit or the information we get from a Public Records Act request tells a very different story.
Yeah,
so that's
I mean, both the Sheriff Bill Brown and District Attorney Joyce Dudley really kind of old school on this. I mean, they're just standing strong. Nothing
yeah,
possibly gone wrong, and
no, they're in lockstep on these.
Which is interesting, because another case that you just wrote about recently in Lompoc, a transgender man, Chris Ruiz, I think is his name.
Mm-hmm.
Again, very strange circumstance, heavy use of gunfire, person's dead. But the attorney for the family is now trying to get the Attorney General's office, State Attorney General's office to do this.
Correct.
And one of the arguments they're making is that the DA has never once found any misconduct whatsoever by any officer.
Yep. And this attorney, not coincidentally, represented a different family and yet another fatal shooting case here in Santa Barbara a few years ago, Brian Carreño, who was shot and killed. And his family received a $850,000 settlement that we only found out about through one of these Public Records Act requests. So this same attorney is now representing the Ruiz family. Yeah, and exactly what you just said. His argument is that, because District Attorney Joyce Dudley is not willing or able to fault any of these deputies, even when there's pretty compelling evidence that there was some wrongdoing involved. He says that she's not an impartial juror. She's not the person to objectively take on these cases, and so he wants a completely outside agency to investigate what happened and prosecute if necessary. So it's just yet another incident of being in the dark about what truly happened. And I mean, I thought he brought up a really interesting point. And speaking of these records requests, I've since put in a request for all fatal shootings in the county of Santa Barbara going back a few decades, and all of the DA's findings of them to see if this guy was right or if he just was exaggerating, if this attorney was correct. I have a feeling that he is. I've been here 12 years and there's been a number of incidents, and I can't think of a single one where any law enforcement officer was faulted in any way whatsoever. Like truly, like not even, oh, they might have done this, or there needs to be some fine tuning of the training there. It's always across the board, perfectly fine, perfectly legal, nothing to see here.
Nothing to see here.
Yeah.
Hey, let me ask you about something else. You did this piece, was quite interesting, about the biggest drug bust in county history. And it happened last August. We were all kind of focused on COVID and it kind of came and went and nothing, but there's really a fascinating story behind it. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that one caught me off guard a little bit because, we hear about these Ponga boats that every so often find their way here to Santa Barbara from Mexico carrying drugs, whether it's marijuana or cocaine. In this case, it was methamphetamine, and it's a pretty regular occurrence. And every once in a while, we get a press release saying, X amount of arrests were made, this many pounds of drugs were seized. And this one was noteworthy because there were almost 36 people arrested, the people on the boat as well as the people who came to unload the boat, which landed between Refugio and El Cap. Up north a little bit, a very remote stretch of coastline. So there's so many people involved and so many drugs involved that I wanted to follow, what happened to these individuals, how they were prosecuted, who they were, and so on. And what I found out is that the guys in the boat, far from how they've been described by law enforcement as hardened, seasoned drug runners from the Sinaloa cartel, were actually, according to their defense attorneys, who I personally believe in this case. I mean, defense attorneys can say some pretty wacky things sometimes, but in this instance, talking to all 5 attorneys and hearing their accounts of speaking to these guys' families and the individuals themselves, they all were fishermen from a small fishing village, essentially, in Sinaloa, Mexico. And they were either kidnapped, a few of them were fully kidnapped, held at gunpoint by the cartel, or blackmailed, basically, by cartel members saying, you're gonna run this boat up for us or we're gonna hurt your family. And apparently this is a tactic by the cartels. They get guys who know how to work boats because they're fishermen and they live on the coast, to do their dirty work, to run the drugs up to California, or under threat of death or death to their families. I mean, we know these cartels don't mess around. Um, so 4 of the 5 guys who were arrested for uh, being on the boat, being the actual smugglers, had no criminal record whatsoever. One of the guys did have a previous drug conviction, so I think his story is maybe a little bit sketchier. But these other 4 guys, by all accounts, were forced into this, and yet after being prosecuted, they're going to spend 6 years in county jail for drug running.
I mean, wasn't the DEA, there was federal agencies that were involved in the bust, but they didn't take on the
Yeah,
prosecution,
it's a strange wrinkle to the whole thing, because this was a ton and a half of marijuana worth about $10 million out on the street.
methamphetamine.
What did I say? Marijuana? Yeah, methamphetamine. Thank you. And it was definitely going across state line, or would be going across state lines. And so why did the feds not take the case? The consensus among the people who knew about the case was that they had an informant either amongst the load crew or down in Sinaloa in the cartel. And if they'd taken the case and prosecuted it, they would have had to reveal who that informant was, that confidential informant. And either they didn't, want to lose them because they're so valuable, or outing them would, be serious trouble for them. But regardless of the true reason, the feds didn't take it. So it was up to our district attorney's office to prosecute. And I mean, I don't think anybody can fault law enforcement for blocking that much meth from getting in the country, right? Like that's.
But none of the guys, they had a whole caravan of guys driving up from Riverside to take this stuff, and they all got off at a misdemeanor. I mean,
they got off on a misdemeanor. So I don't know. And to the district attorney's office credit, they couldn't talk a lot about this case yet because it is still pending. There are some sentences that need to be handed down, and so on and so forth. So I don't know. Maybe more will be revealed in the future. But yeah, it was just a lot more of a complicated, nuanced story than I think most of us realized.
Yeah, it was really interesting. It was a really interesting read. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we just got a couple of minutes left. Let me ask you a couple of things real quick. Can you shed any light on what's going on with these arrests in the city on the east side? The 2 teenagers that were killed. There was 2 arrests. There were 3 more arrests, and another guy was killed. I mean, it's all gang related. I take it. That chief told me that the other day. But
yeah.
Can you connect the dots at all on that?
I wish I could. I cannot. I don't know any more than you probably know. My good friend and colleague Nick Welsh would probably know more too. He's been on this story more than anybody else, and is speaking with the families and so on and so forth. But yeah, no, I just I'm not trying to sandbag you. I just don't know.
Yeah. I also want to call attention to some other reporting you did have been doing again, and it goes to this point of following stories, and that was the Loved Ones Lost series that you did with people who got COVID and died. And I think we're up around 440, 450 people dead in the county. And it just, at some point, the whole pandemic just became this sort of statistical story. And,
Right.
We all sort of lost track of the fact that every one of these people had a family and something. And you did bring, a number of these people to life and doing profiles of them. What was that like? What was that assignment like?
Yeah, the idea came from actually the New York Times. They've been doing a series pretty much since the start of the pandemic, where they profiled these individuals, these people, and reminded all of us that these are human beings and not, as you said, statistics on some government website. They're not just a ticker that moves up. So we thought it was important to talk about and remember people locally who were taken by COVID. And it was, on one hand, it was a very sad and grim assignment. But on the other hand, I got to say, I was pretty honored to be able to write about these people, many of whom led really remarkable, interesting, rich lives, and that their families were comfortable and willing to share those stories with us, and let us tell them and use their images. So it was, yeah, it was a double-edged sword, but I think it was valuable in that there's a record, not of all the people. I mean, we only, I think maybe have profiled 10% of that 450 you mentioned. I would love to someday, you know, have them all compiled, and do it that way. But it was, yeah, I'm not an obituary writer, and so this was sort of a different set of mind muscles for me to use.
Well, it's
Um,
like writing a little biography
it
of
was,
people, and
yeah, and I
the
was sort of
same time.
totally, and I had sort of, I think, misrepresented it to myself, where I'm going to be writing about these people's deaths, but I was really writing about their lives the whole time. I mean, their deaths were the period at the end of the piece. I mean, in some cases a really heartbreaking way that they went and couldn't be seen by family, and a lot of these people were elderly, and so had some stages of dementia or Alzheimer's and didn't quite know what was going on. So I think some of that nuance, and information had been lost on people too. It's not like it was just lights out for everybody who got COVID and died. It's like their um, their stories were pretty heart wrenching in a lot of cases for them and for their families.
Yeah, I think, 50 years from now, when the history of the pandemic, is becomes clear, I think that's going to be one of the failings of the journalism was, people got so caught up in the statistics and in the science and in the politics and everything, and
Yeah.
everybody kind of forgot what it looked like on a human level, on a one-on-one level. So I just wanted to commend
Well, thanks.
that series, because I thought it was a really important one.
Thanks.
And then let me just ask you really quickly, among all your other duties over there, you seem to have gotten the critter beat.
That's right.
You had that cover story about people's pets a while ago, but the gray wolf
Yeah.
appearing, what's that about? That was really,
It's funny. Right before we jumped on, I went to the Fish and Wildlife page to see if there was an update on him, Mr. OR 103. Looks like he's still in San Luis Obispo. So hasn't come down to Santa Barbara, but hasn't gone back up to
this is
Oregon
the first sighting of a gray wolf in Southern California in like forever,
in
right?
more than a century. Yep. First one to make it this far down. So there are packs up in Washington and Arizona and Northern California, but wild packs, but none of them have migrated this far south. So this young male, as wolves are wont to do, struck out on his own a few months ago from a pack in Northern California to look for a mate and look for territory that he could make his own. Sort of a bittersweet story because there's probably no mates down here for him to find. As the guy I talked to at Forest Watch said, he's looking for love in all the wrong places, and it's sad but true. Unless a female picks up his track and follows him down here, that's possible. It's kind of a long shot, but that could happen. But yeah, no, it's really exciting. It's a huge boon for the gray wolf, conservation efforts that have been going on for a while. They were eradicated a century ago, basically by the livestock industry, and the hired guns they got to wipe these guys out. So people are still, I think, a little leery of the fact that there might be a wolf in the backcountry, but they're very they're not dangerous to humans. I mean, I won't say that like completely, but they're not a threat to people unless you're running at them and trying to wrestle them or something. But
and then you have this heartbreaking story about Chloe the Yorkie.
yeah, poor Chloe. She's had a rough go of it. So yeah, I mean, this was kind of bizarre, but two women were in their backyard in Montecito. This is in August, and their little Yorkshire Terrier was in the backyard with them, a fenced backyard. she didn't have her collar on, and she wasn't microchipped. And somehow she got out of the yard. The way the women tell it, they heard a yelp from her, and then she just was nowhere to be found. She was gone. Um, and they basically did everything they could, except for maybe the one thing that would have reconnected them with Chloe in a timely manner, which was call animal services. I mean, they called 911, they called the fire department, they launched a mini search party, they put up posters, they fanned out over social media, but they didn't contact animal services. And if they had, they would have found out that Chloe was picked up the next day. The county held her for the prescribed
badly injured.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, really badly broken leg. So who knows what happened between when she was in the yard and when she was found, but it's bizarre. It'll probably always be a mystery. But so the county fixed up her leg, held her for a few days, and then a new owners adopted her, which is county policy. And the old owners, though, are suing to get her back because the new owners won't give her up. They say, we followed the rules. That's where it blows my mind. It's like that you're the new owners and you've had this dog for like a few days and you refuse to give her up to
like
the owner.
4, right?
Yeah, and they raised her as a puppy, the original owners. So that's just heartless, man. I don't know who does that, but the law's the law. So these women are seeing if there's any way around it.
All right. Well, there's 92,000 stories in the Naked City, and that's one of them. And then, hey, the last thing Hap wanted me to ask you, what's new on the Bella Squardo?
Oh man,
the doll collection, and are we ever going to get to see the inside of it, or what's going on there?
I talked to somebody recently who has as much knowledge as anyone on what's going on up there, and it's quiet. There's nothing going on. Yet the leader of the nonprofit that formed is still getting a nice paycheck, and the board, I don't know what they're doing.
Shout out to Jeremy.
Yeah, if you go on their website, there's no events plan, there's no announcements coming up. These guys promised years ago to give us some kind of sense of how they're going to turn this place into a public arts center the way Huguette Clark intended it to. And we're how many years in? 6, 7 going on? I don't know, 8. They always have an excuse, why they can't talk about it. It's the IRS, or it's the fire.
That's all done, right? I mean, all the legal stuff is done. Is it done?
Yeah. I don't know of any reason why they can't be moving the ball down the field with respect to opening this place to the public.
And is Dick Wolf, Mr. Law and Order, is he still the head of the board?
He's still on the board, but again, I don't know who's doing what, if anything, or if it's just a vanity project, or if they're all partying up there. I mean,
whose district is that in? Is that Megan Harmon's Manhattanization, Megan? Or
yes, that's a really good question. I guess so.
Sure.
Yeah,
they ought to be doing something.
Anyway. I know, man. Someone ought to be doing something. But
all right. Hey, Tyler Hayden, thanks so much for taking the time to talk about your reporting. You're doing the Lord's work out there.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you spending some time with us. Take it easy, man.
Thank you. See you.